My girlfriend got a memorial tattoo for her dead ex and cried every time she visited his grave. Turns out only the relationship was dead. I met my girlfriend Nina at a co-worker's housewarming party. She was funny and loud, and everyone in the room wanted to talk to her. I couldn't believe she gave me her number at the end of the night. We started dating a week later, and everything moved fast. She practically lived at my apartment for 2 months. I didn't mind, because I was crazy about her. The first time I saw the tattoo was about 3 weeks in. It was on her ribcage. A date and the name Elliot in cursive with a small heart. I asked about it, and she got really quiet. She told me Elliot was her ex, who passed away 2 years ago. They were together for 3 years, and he died in a car accident. She said she got the tattoo to honor him and keep him close to her heart. I felt terrible for asking. I held her while she cried and told her I understood. I told her I would never ask her to remove it or cover it. I told her grief doesn't have a timeline, and she could talk about him whenever she needed to. She called me the most understanding boyfriend she'd ever had. I really believed I was doing the right thing. For the next 8 months, Elliot was everywhere in our relationship. Nina kept a small box of his things in my closet. She said she couldn't bear to throw them away. I said that was fine. She had his picture in her wallet. She said it helped her feel like he was still watching over her. I said that was fine. She visited his grave every month and sometimes came home crying for days after. I held her every time. She compared me to him constantly. She said Elliot would have liked this restaurant. She said Elliot hated that movie too. She said Elliot used to make her coffee the same way I did. I told myself she was processing her trauma, and I needed to be patient. Then she started getting mad at me for not being enough like him. She said Elliot would never forget to text her good morning. She said Elliot always noticed when she got her nails done. She said Elliot made her feel like the only woman in the world, and maybe I should take notes. I asked her if she was actually ready to be in a new relationship. She cried and said I was being insensitive about her grief. Her friends told me I needed to be more supportive. Her mom called me once and thanked me for taking care of her daughter through such a difficult time. I started to feel like I was competing with a ghost and losing. One night, Nina left her phone on the couch while she showered. It buzzed with a text. I didn't mean to look, but the preview showed a name. Elliot. My stomach dropped. I picked up the phone and read the message. It said he missed her and couldn't wait to see her this weekend. I scrolled up and found 6 months of messages. Elliot was asking when she was going to leave me. Nina told him she needed more time because I was paying most of her bills. Elliot said he hated sharing her with some other guy. Nina said she hated it too, but I was useful. They'd been meeting up every time she supposedly visited his grave. The whole thing was a lie. He never died. They broke up because he cheated on her with her cousin. She took him back, but pretended he was dead so she could date other people while keeping him around. The tattoo was real. The grief was fake. I was just the idiot funding her life while she played house with someone else. I put the phone back exactly where I found it. When Nina came out of the shower, I told her I was tired and went to bed early. I didn't sleep at all. The next morning, I started making changes. First, I told Nina my lease was up in 2 months, and I wasn't renewing. I said I was moving to a smaller place closer to work. She panicked and asked where that left her. I told her she could figure out her own living situation since we weren't married and she had a job. She cried and asked why I was being so cold. I said I was just being practical. Then I stopped paying for things. When we went out, I asked for separate checks. When she needed gas money, I told her I was tight this month. When her phone bill was due, I said she should call her mom. She complained that I used to be so generous. I told her I was reevaluating my spending habits. She asked if I was breaking up with her. I said no, I just wanted us to be more independent. That confused her enough to buy me time. I started getting busy on weekends. Every Saturday, she supposedly visited the grave. I had plans: gym in the morning, lunch with friends, errands all afternoon. She couldn't sneak off to see Elliot if I wasn't home to lie to. She got frustrated and asked why we never spent weekends together anymore. I said I was working on myself. She said I was being distant. I said I was just growing as a person. The final part of my plan came together when I found a new apartment. I signed the lease without telling her. I started moving my stuff out slowly while she was at work. She didn't notice because she never paid attention to anything that wasn't about her. On moving day, I waited until she left for work and packed everything else. I blocked her on everything before she even got home. Nina showed up at my job a week later, demanding answers. Nina stood in the lobby with her arms crossed and her voice getting louder with every word. She kept asking why I blocked her and moved without telling her. The security guard near the entrance desk started walking toward us. I saw Kellen across the floor by the copy machine. He looked up at the noise and walked over fast. He asked if everything was okay. I told Nina we could talk outside. She followed me toward the parking lot but kept yelling about how I owed her an explanation. Her voice echoed off the glass doors as we pushed through them. The afternoon sun hit my face, and I kept walking until we were away from the building. Nina was still going on about how I abandoned her and left her with nowhere to live. I turned around and looked at her. I told her I knew about Elliot being alive. Her face went completely white like someone had drained all the blood out of it. She started making these stuttering sounds and couldn't get words out. Then she found her voice and said, I invaded her privacy by looking at her phone. I pointed out that her phone buzzed with a message from her supposedly dead boyfriend. Any reasonable person would have questions about that. She opened her mouth and closed it again. I could see her brain working to figure out what I knew and what I didn't. Nina's eyes filled with tears, and she started crying. She said Elliot manipulated her into taking him back. She said she was scared to tell me the truth. Her shoulders shook, and she put her face in her hands. I asked her which part was manipulation. Was it the 6 months of messages planning when she would leave me? Or was it the part where she called me useful for paying her bills? She stopped crying instantly. The tears just shut off like a faucet. Her face changed from sad to angry in about 2 seconds. She realized I read way more than just one message. I saw everything. She knew I knew the whole story. Her hands balled up into fists at her sides. She started screaming that I led her on by pretending everything was fine for weeks. She said I was planning to abandon her the whole time. I stayed calm and told her I needed time to get my affairs in order, just like she needed time to figure out her living situation. I used her own words back at her. The parallel wasn't lost on her. Her face got red and she lunged forward to shove me. Kellen stepped between us before she could touch me. He told her she needed to leave. His voice was firm but not loud. Nina looked at him like she was surprised he was still there. Nina took a step back and threatened to come to my apartment and get her stuff. I reminded her she didn't know where I lived now. Her mouth opened in shock. I told her the box of Elliot's things she kept at my old place was in a storage unit. I would text her the location and access code. She demanded I give her money for moving expenses since I was kicking her out. I laughed right in her face. I couldn't help it. The audacity of asking me for money after everything was too much. I turned around and walked back toward the building. Kellen followed me. Nina yelled something else, but I didn't turn around. The glass doors closed behind us and cut off her voice. The air conditioning inside felt cold after the heat outside. My heart was pounding, but I felt good. I felt clear. Kellen walked with me to the elevator and then upstairs to my desk. He asked if I was okay. His face showed real concern about what he just saw. I gave him the short version. Nina faked her boyfriend's death to run 2 relationships at the same time. Kellen just stared at me. He didn't say anything for a full minute. Then he said that was the most messed up thing he'd ever heard. He offered to buy me lunch so I could decompress. I agreed because sitting at my desk after that felt impossible. We grabbed our wallets and headed back downstairs. We walked to a sandwich place 2 blocks away. The walk helped me calm down. My hands stopped shaking. At lunch, I told Kellen the whole story. The memorial tattoo, the fake grave visits, finding the messages. He kept shaking his head like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. He said he couldn't imagine how violated I must feel. I admitted it was less about heartbreak and more about anger at being used so completely. He said that was a healthy response to someone treating me like an ATM with benefits. We ate our sandwiches and talked about other things, work stuff, weekend plans, normal things that had nothing to do with Nina. It felt good to have a conversation that wasn't about her drama. When we got back to the office, I felt better than I had in weeks. Danielle from HR called me into her office about an hour later. I walked down the hall to her door and knocked. She waved me in and asked me to sit down. She said she needed to talk about the lobby incident. I apologized for the disruption. I explained it was an ex who showed up without warning. Danielle was professional and kind about it. She said she just needed to document what happened. She asked if I needed any support or felt unsafe. I appreciated her asking, but said I was fine. Nina wouldn't be back. Danielle nodded and made some notes. She told me to let her know if anything else happened. I thanked her and went back to my desk. The rest of the afternoon passed slowly. I couldn't focus on work. I kept thinking about Nina's face when she realized I knew everything. That evening, my phone rang while I was making dinner. It was Craig. He said Nina contacted him on social media. She told him I abandoned her without warning. I put him on speaker and opened my phone. I sent him screenshots of the messages between Nina and Elliot. He went quiet while he read them. Then he responded with a string of angry face emojis. He said he would block her right now. He asked if I wanted him to drive up this weekend to hang out. That actually sounded perfect. I told him yes, and we made plans. He would arrive Friday night. We could order pizza and just hang out like we used to. Craig said he was proud of me for handling this the right way. I wasn't sure what the right way was, but I appreciated him saying it. After I hung up with Craig, I opened my messages. I texted Nina the storage unit information like I promised. Unit 247 at the place on Oak Street. The access code was 8834. I kept my word even though she didn't deserve my courtesy. My phone buzzed less than a minute later. Nina sent a long message about how I was going to regret treating her this way. She said Elliot treated her, so much better than I ever did. She said I would end up alone and miserable. I read the whole thing without feeling anything. I took a screenshot in case I needed evidence later. Then I deleted her number entirely. I blocked the number too so she couldn't text me again. I finished making my dinner and ate it while watching something mindless on TV. The apartment felt quiet and peaceful. No Nina crying about Elliot. No Nina comparing me to a dead man who wasn't actually dead. Just me and my thoughts and the sound of the TV. I went to bed early and slept better than I had in months. Friday night arrived with a knock on my apartment door. I opened it to find Craig standing there with 2 pizza boxes balanced on one arm and a 6-pack of beer in his other hand. He grinned at me and walked inside without waiting for an invitation. We set up in the living room with the food spread out on the coffee table. Craig opened 2 beers and handed me one. He asked how I was really doing, not the polite version I gave everyone else. I admitted it was weird having so much quiet in my life after months of Nina's constant drama. He nodded and said that made sense given what I'd been through. We ate pizza and started talking about the whole situation. Craig brought up all the red flags I'd missed or ignored during the relationship. He pointed out that the constant comparisons to Elliot should have been a massive warning sign from the start. I told him I thought I was being supportive of her grief and didn't want to seem insensitive. Craig took a long drink of his beer and shook his head. He said my empathy wasn't a weakness, even though Nina exploited it. He explained that caring about someone's pain is normal, but Nina weaponized my kindness to manipulate me. I asked him if he thought I was stupid for believing the whole dead boyfriend story. Craig looked me straight in the eye and said absolutely not. He reminded me that Nina had a memorial tattoo and fake grave visits and a whole performance designed to sell the lie. He said anyone would have believed her given how committed she was to the deception. We stayed up late going through the timeline of the relationship. I told him about the box of Elliot's things she kept in my closet and the picture in her wallet. Craig got progressively angrier as I shared more details. He said Nina was sick to use someone's supposed death as a cover story for cheating. I agreed, but admitted part of me still felt guilty for not seeing through it sooner. Craig threw a pizza crust back in the box and told me to stop that right now. He said I needed to redirect that guilt where it belonged, which was entirely on Nina. She was the one who lied and cheated and used me. I was just someone who trusted his girlfriend, which was completely reasonable. By the time we finished the beer, it was past midnight. I felt lighter somehow after talking through everything with Craig. He crashed on my couch, and I went to bed feeling more settled than I had in weeks. Saturday morning came with Craig banging around in my kitchen making coffee. I got up and found him already dressed in gym clothes. He suggested we go work out and burn off some of my residual anger physically. I wasn't sure that would help, but I agreed to try. We drove to my gym, and Craig pushed me through an intense workout. He had me hitting the heavy bag until my knuckles hurt through the gloves. Every punch felt like I was getting rid of some of the frustration I'd been carrying around. We moved to weights, and Craig spotted me through sets that left my muscles shaking. He kept encouraging me to push harder and get it all out. The workout helped more than I expected. By the time we finished, I was dripping sweat, but my head felt clearer than it had in weeks. We sat in the locker room, catching our breath. Craig looked over at me and said I seemed lighter somehow. He explained that I'd been carrying around weight I didn't realize was there, and he was absolutely right about that. I told him the workout actually made a difference. He smiled and said physical activity was underrated for processing emotional garbage. We showered and changed, then headed to a diner near my apartment for breakfast. I ordered eggs and toast, while Craig got a massive plate of pancakes. We were halfway through eating when my phone rang. The screen showed an unknown number and I almost didn't answer. Craig raised his eyebrows and gestured for me to pick up. I swiped to accept the call. A woman's voice asked if this was me, using my full name. I confirmed and asked who was calling. She identified herself as Michaela, one of Nina's friends. My stomach dropped, but I kept my voice steady. Michaela said she needed to talk to me because something Nina said wasn't adding up. I glanced at Craig across the table. He was watching me with concern on his face. I told Michaela I was hesitant to get involved in Nina's drama. She quickly said she understood, but really needed to know the truth about what happened between us. I thought about hanging up, but curiosity won. I agreed to meet her for coffee that afternoon. Michaela suggested a place downtown, and we set a time for 2 o'clock. I hung up, and Craig immediately asked what that was about. I explained that one of Nina's friends wanted to meet and talk. Craig said he'd wait at my apartment while I went. He told me to be careful because it might be a setup to ambush me with more of Nina's lies. That afternoon, I drove to the coffee shop Michaela suggested. I arrived a few minutes early and ordered a black coffee. I sat at a table near the window where I could see the door. Michaela walked in right at 2 o'clock. She looked uncomfortable and kept glancing around like she didn't want to be seen. I raised my hand to wave her over. She ordered something at the counter, then joined me at the table. Michaela sat down and immediately apologized for reaching out. She said she felt awkward about this whole thing. I told her it was fine and asked what she wanted to know. She took a breath and explained that Nina told everyone I kicked her out because I was jealous of her dead boyfriend's memory. Michaela said Nina painted me as controlling and insecure. She claimed I couldn't handle her grief and gave her an ultimatum about the tattoo. I listened without interrupting while Michaela laid out Nina's entire victim narrative. When she finished, Michaela looked at me and said something about the story didn't sit right with her. She asked me to tell her what actually happened. I pulled out my phone and opened the screenshots I'd saved. I turned the screen toward Michaela and let her read the messages between Nina and Elliot. Her eyes went wide as she scrolled through the conversation. She read about Nina calling me useful and discussing when to leave me. She saw Elliot complaining about sharing her with another guy. Michaela's hand started shaking as she held my phone. She looked up at me with her mouth slightly open. She whispered that she couldn't believe Nina lied about something so serious. I took my phone back and told her that Elliot wasn't dead and never had been. I explained the whole scheme about fake grave visits and the memorial tattoo for a living person. Michaela put her face in her hands and sat there for a long moment. When she looked up, her eyes were red. She told me she was one of the friends who encouraged me to be more supportive when Nina complained about me. She said she felt terrible for enabling the manipulation without knowing the truth. I told her she couldn't have known because Nina's performance was convincing enough to fool everyone, including me. I explained that Nina had a tattoo and a whole backstory and months of consistent lying. Michaela nodded, but still looked upset with herself. She asked if she could share the truth with their mutual friends. She said Nina had been painting herself as the victim to everyone they knew. I thought about it for a second, then told her she could tell people whatever she wanted. I gave her permission to share the screenshots if she needed proof. Michaela thanked me and said she was sorry for everything. We finished our coffee, and she left, looking shaken. I drove back to my apartment where Craig was waiting. He took one look at my face and said the coffee meeting must have been intense. I sat down on the couch and filled him in on everything Michaela revealed. I told him about Nina's victim narrative and how she'd been telling everyone I was jealous and controlling. Craig shook his head and said that was typical manipulator behavior. He explained that controlling the story was how people like Nina maintained their image. He said I should feel good about how I handled it. I asked what he meant. Craig pointed out that I stayed calm and gave Michaela evidence instead of just expecting people to take my word for it. He said that showed maturity and confidence. I admitted I was worried about what other people thought. Craig told me that anyone worth knowing would see the truth once they had all the facts. He was proud of me for not getting defensive or angry with Michaela. I thanked him for the support, and we ordered Chinese food for dinner. We spent the rest of the evening watching action movies and not talking about Nina at all. That night, my phone started buzzing with messages. I picked it up and saw texts from people I barely knew. They were friends of friends who'd apparently heard the real story from Michaela. Most of the messages were apologetic for believing Nina's version of events. A few people shared that they always thought something seemed off about her grief, but didn't want to say anything. One guy I'd met twice at parties wrote a long message about how Nina tried to get him to trash talk me at a gathering. He said he refused because he didn't know the situation. I responded politely to each message, but kept my answers short. I thanked people for reaching out but didn't engage deeply. Craig looked over from the couch and asked if I was okay. I told him I was getting messages from people who heard the truth. He asked how I felt about that. I said I was ready to move forward, not rehash everything with acquaintances. Craig nodded and said that was a healthy boundary to set. The messages kept coming for another hour. I eventually put my phone on silent and focused on the movie. Sunday morning arrived with the smell of coffee. Craig was already up and packing his stuff. I made us breakfast and we ate quickly. Before he left, Craig made me promise I'd actually process this betrayal instead of just pushing it down. I started to brush him off, but he cut me off. He said he was serious about me finding someone to talk to professionally. I agreed to consider therapy. Craig pulled out his phone and sent me links to 3 therapists who specialized in relationship trauma. He said he'd already done the research and I just needed to pick one. I looked at the links and promised I'd schedule something. We hugged goodbye at the door. Craig told me I deserved someone who saw my kindness as a gift, not a resource to exploit. I thanked him for coming up and spending the weekend with me. He said that's what brothers were for and told me to call him any time. I watched him drive away, then went back inside my quiet apartment. The following week at work, I threw myself into a big project that had been sitting on the back burner. I focused on productive tasks and stopped letting my mind wander to Nina. Kellen stopped by my desk on Tuesday afternoon. He commented that I seemed more like myself again. I looked up from my computer and realized he was right. Without Nina's constant emotional demands and comparisons to Elliot, I had energy for things I actually enjoyed. I told Kellen that getting rid of the drama had freed up a lot of mental space. He laughed and said he could tell. He mentioned my work quality had been excellent lately. I thanked him and went back to my project feeling good about the direction my life was heading. On Wednesday afternoon, my phone buzzed with a message from another unknown number. I opened it and read a text from someone named Bryson. He identified himself as Nina's cousin and Elliot's former affair partner. My eyebrows shot up as I processed that information. Bryson said Michaela gave him my number and he wanted to apologize for his role in the whole mess. I sat back in my desk chair and stared at the message. I was surprised, but also curious about hearing his side of the story. I typed back that I was willing to talk. Bryson asked if we could meet for coffee sometime this week. I suggested Thursday after work, and he agreed immediately. He sent me the address of a coffee shop and thanked me for being open to meeting. I put my phone away and tried to focus on work, but my mind kept going back to what Bryson might tell me about Nina and Elliot's original breakup. Thursday afternoon, I left work early and drove to the coffee shop Bryson suggested. The place was small and quiet, tucked between a bookstore and a dry cleaner on a side street I'd never noticed before. I spotted him immediately at a corner table, nervously tapping his fingers against his cup. He looked younger than I expected, maybe mid-20s, with dark hair and the same sharp jawline Nina had. I walked over and sat down across from him without ordering anything. He thanked me for coming and said he wasn't sure I'd actually show up. I told him I was curious about his side of things, and he nodded like he'd been expecting that answer. Bryson started talking before I could ask any questions. He explained that 2 years ago at his aunt's wedding, he met Elliot at the bar during the reception. They hit it off and ended up hooking up in one of the hotel rooms upstairs. Elliot never mentioned having a girlfriend, and Bryson had no idea Nina existed until 3 days later when his cousin posted about the breakup on social media. He said Nina was destroyed when she found out, and she cut off half the family for not telling her sooner that Elliot had been flirting with people at the wedding. Bryson tried to apologize, but Nina blocked him on everything and refused to speak to him at family gatherings. He watched her grieve the relationship from a distance, feeling guilty, but respecting her need for space. When Michaela told him about the fake death story and the memorial tattoo, he felt sick to his stomach. He said he had no idea they got back together, let alone that Nina was using Elliot's supposed death to manipulate other people. I asked him why he wanted to meet with me specifically, and he looked down at his coffee cup. He admitted he'd been carrying guilt about the affair for 2 years, wondering if he'd ruined Nina's life by sleeping with her boyfriend. Learning about her elaborate lies made him realize she was way more manipulative than he ever understood. We talked for over an hour about family dynamics and how Nina always played the victim in every situation. Bryson shared stories about growing up with her, how she'd lie to their grandparents to get them in trouble, how she'd steal things and blame it on other cousins. He said everyone in the family knew she had issues, but they all made excuses because her dad left when she was young. I told him about the 8 months I spent funding her life while she secretly met up with Elliot, and he shook his head in disbelief. He said he felt terrible that his mistake 2 years ago somehow led to me getting caught in Nina's web. I told him it wasn't his fault because Nina made her own choices, and he seemed relieved to hear that. When we finally left the coffee shop, Bryson thanked me again for meeting him and said he hoped I'd find someone who actually deserved my kindness. I drove home feeling like I understood Nina's psychology better now, even if it didn't excuse anything she did. That weekend, I finally tackled the last few boxes from my move that had been sitting in my closet for weeks. Most of it was random stuff I'd packed in a hurry, things I didn't need immediately but couldn't throw away. I found old textbooks from college, a broken watch I kept meaning to fix, and a stack of photos from before I met Nina. At the bottom of the third box, I pulled out a framed picture of Nina and me from last summer. We were at some outdoor festival and she was laughing at something I'd said. I stared at the photo for a minute, expecting to feel sad or angry, but instead, I just felt relieved. Relieved that I discovered the truth before wasting more time, before getting more tangled up in her lies, before maybe even proposing like I'd been considering a few months ago. I walked the frame directly to the trash can in my kitchen and dropped it in without any ceremony or second thoughts. The rest of the afternoon, I finished unpacking everything and arranged my apartment exactly how I wanted it. I hung up my own pictures, organized my books by genre instead of how Nina liked them, and set up my desk facing the window instead of the wall. By evening, the place felt completely mine for the first time since I'd moved in. Monday morning at work, I was scrolling through my phone during my lunch break when I had a weird impulse. I downloaded a dating app, not because I was actually ready to date anyone, but because I wanted to remind myself that options existed. I created a basic profile with a couple recent photos and wrote a simple bio about my job and hobbies. Then I just scrolled through profiles of other people, reading about their interests and looking at their pictures. I didn't message anyone or swipe right on anyone, but something about seeing all these different people who might actually be honest felt strangely therapeutic. When I got back to my desk, Kellen stopped by and asked what I was grinning about. I told him I'd downloaded a dating app, but wasn't actually using it yet, and he laughed so hard he had to sit down. He said that was the healthiest rebound behavior he'd ever heard of, and I should take my time before jumping into anything new. 2 weeks after the parking lot confrontation with Nina, I was checking my email before bed when I noticed a message from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line said, "I'm sorry," and my stomach dropped a little as I opened it. Nina had written this long apology claiming she was in therapy now and finally understood how wrong her behavior was. She went on for several paragraphs about taking responsibility and working on herself and respecting my decision to cut contact. The whole thing felt performative rather than genuine, especially the part near the end where she said she hoped we could eventually be friends because I was such an important part of her life. I read through it twice, looking for any actual acknowledgement of specific things she did, but it was all vague language about mistakes and growth. I closed the email and moved it to trash without responding because I owed her absolutely nothing, especially not forgiveness on her timeline. The next morning at work, my boss called me into her office, and I immediately worried I'd done something wrong. Instead, she told me I was assigned to lead a new team project, which was a significant step up in responsibility and visibility within the company. Danielle sat in on the meeting and mentioned during the announcement that my recent work quality had been exceptional and they wanted to give me more opportunities to shine. I thanked them both and went back to my desk, feeling genuinely proud of myself. I realized that removing Nina's chaos from my daily life had made me better at my job, more focused and creative than I'd been in months. Without the constant emotional drain of her demands and lies, I had energy to actually care about my work again. That evening, Craig called to check in like he'd been doing every few days since his visit. After we caught up on general life stuff, he asked if I'd found a therapist yet. I admitted I'd been putting it off because I felt fine and didn't think I really needed it. He didn't let me off the hook, saying that processing betrayal properly now would save me problems in future relationships. Before I could argue, he texted me links to 3 therapists who specialized in relationship trauma. He said he'd already done the research, and all I had to do was pick one and make an appointment. His persistence actually worked, because I looked at the links that night and found one with good reviews and decent availability. I scheduled a consultation for the following week, partly because Craig would keep bugging me if I didn't, and partly because maybe he had a point. My first therapy session the next Wednesday was awkward in the way I expected it to be. The therapist was a woman in her 40s with a calm voice and an office full of plants. I gave her the basic story about Nina and the fake dead boyfriend, and she listened without interrupting or looking shocked. When I finished, she asked me some questions about my relationship history and how I typically handled conflict. After about 30 minutes of talking, she pointed out that I seemed to have a pattern of over-functioning in relationships to avoid conflict. She asked me to think about what I actually wanted in a partner versus what I was willing to tolerate, and the question caught me off guard. I realized, sitting there in her office, that I'd never really considered what I deserved from a relationship, only what I could handle or put up with. The distinction felt important, but I couldn't quite articulate why. She gave me some homework about identifying my needs and boundaries, and I left feeling like the session had been more helpful than I'd expected. The question about what I wanted versus what I'd tolerate sat with me all week, popping into my head at random moments. On Friday afternoon, Michaela texted me with an update I hadn't asked for. She said Nina and Elliot broke up again after he found out she was still talking to other guys on dating apps while they were together. Apparently, Nina had been calling everyone she knew, crying about how all men were terrible and nobody appreciated her. Michaela said Nina showed zero self-awareness about her own role in the pattern. I thanked Michaela for letting me know, but told her I didn't need updates about Nina's drama anymore. She understood immediately and promised this would be the last time she'd bring Nina up unless something directly affected me. The following week, I actually went on a date with someone I'd matched with on the app. Her name was Jessica, and she worked in marketing for a tech company downtown. We met at a casual restaurant near both our apartments and talked about our jobs, our hobbies, what shows we were watching. There was no trauma dumping, no red flags, no mentions of dead exes or complicated situations. We didn't have amazing chemistry, but the simplicity of having an honest conversation with someone felt almost revolutionary after 8 months of Nina's manipulation. When the check came, we split it without any weird tension, and she texted me later saying she'd had a nice time. I texted back the same thing and meant it, even though I knew we probably wouldn't go out again. The normalcy of the whole experience felt like proof that not everyone was like Nina, and that alone made it worthwhile. My next therapy session came a few days after the date with Jessica. I sat in the same chair as before and told my therapist about how strange the evening had felt. She asked what made it strange, and I tried to explain that everything was too normal. No drama, no red flags, no complicated backstory involving fake death. Just 2 people having dinner and talking about regular things. My therapist leaned forward slightly and asked what specifically made normal feel weird. I thought about it for a minute before admitting I kept waiting for something bad to happen. I kept expecting Jessica to reveal some massive secret, or start comparing me to someone else, or ask me to pay for things she couldn't afford. My therapist nodded like she'd been expecting that answer. She told me Nina had trained me to expect chaos and deception in relationships. She said my brain learned that caring about someone meant getting manipulated, so now normal interactions felt wrong because they didn't include the manipulation I'd been conditioned to anticipate. She asked me to think about what a healthy relationship actually looked like versus what I'd normalized during 8 months with Nina. The question made me uncomfortable because I realized I didn't really know anymore. She gave me homework about identifying what felt safe versus what felt familiar, and said learning to trust again would take time and practice. I left feeling like I'd just discovered I'd been speaking the wrong language for almost a year. Work sent me to a conference in Denver 3 days later. I packed a bag and flew out on a Wednesday morning, grateful for the change of scenery. The conference was at a huge hotel downtown with hundreds of people from my industry. I attended panels about project management and team leadership, took notes during presentations, and actually engaged with the material instead of thinking about Nina every 5 minutes. During lunch on the first day, I sat with people from other companies and we talked about our work challenges and strategies. Nobody asked about my personal life. Nobody trauma dumped. Nobody needed anything from me except professional conversation. It felt incredible. I networked during the evening reception, exchanged business cards with people who might be useful contacts later, and remembered that I had an entire identity outside of being Nina's financial support system. On the second day, Kellen texted asking how the conference was going. I took a selfie in front of one of the panel displays and sent it to him. I was genuinely smiling in the photo, not the fake smile I'd been wearing for months while Nina drained me. Kellen texted back saying I looked happy and relaxed. I realized he was right. For the first time since discovering those messages on Nina's phone, I felt like myself again. The conference ended on Friday afternoon, and I flew home feeling energized instead of exhausted. I got back to my apartment around 8 that night and found a package sitting outside my door. There was no return address, and I didn't recognize the handwriting on the label. I brought it inside and opened it carefully, half expecting some kind of trap from Nina. Inside was the box of Elliot's things that Nina had kept at my old place. The same box I'd put in storage and sent her the access code for weeks ago. There was a note on top written in Nina's handwriting, saying she never picked it up from storage and didn't want it anymore. She said I could do whatever I wanted with it because she was moving on with her life. I stared at the box for a long time, debating what to do. Part of me wanted to throw it in the dumpster immediately. Another part thought I should return it to sender or leave it at her mom's house. But both of those options meant more contact with Nina or her family, and I was done with all of that. I opened the box and looked through the contents. Concert tickets from shows they'd attended together, a hoodie with Elliot's college logo, some photos of them looking happy before everything fell apart, a few books with his name written inside the front covers. Nothing valuable or important, just the kind of stuff people keep because throwing it away feels wrong. I closed the box back up and decided to donate everything to charity the next morning. I wasn't going to be Nina's storage solution any longer. She could deal with her own emotional baggage instead of shipping it to me. Kellen texted me the following week saying his friend was having a small party and wanted to know if I'd come. He mentioned his friend had a coworker who was single and might be there. I almost said no because I wasn't sure I was ready for another setup, but something made me agree. The party was at an apartment across town on Saturday night. I showed up with a bottle of wine and met Kellen's friend and about a dozen other people. The coworker was there. Her name was Everly, and she worked in graphic design. We ended up talking in the kitchen for over an hour while the party continued around us. She was funny and easy to talk to, and the conversation flowed without any awkward silences. We talked about our jobs, the shows we were watching, places we wanted to travel. Normal stuff that felt remarkably refreshing after months of Nina's constant drama. When she asked about my last relationship, I gave her the honest but brief version. I told her my ex lied about her boyfriend being dead, and I found out through text messages. Everly's eyes widened, but she didn't look horrified or judgmental. She just said that sounded really difficult, and asked if I was doing okay now. I told her I was in therapy and working through it. She nodded and said that was healthy, then changed the subject to something lighter. We exchanged numbers before I left, and she texted me the next day suggesting we grab coffee sometime. I agreed, and we made plans for the following weekend. The whole interaction felt like progress. She didn't run away screaming when I mentioned my psycho ex, which had to be a good sign. Craig called on Tuesday saying he was coming to visit again that weekend. He showed up Friday evening with snacks and immediately told me I looked better than last time. We ordered pizza and caught up on family news and his job situation. Saturday afternoon, we went to a basketball game at the arena downtown. We got decent seats, ate overpriced nachos, and just enjoyed being brothers without heavy conversations about betrayal and manipulation. The home team won, and we cheered with everyone else in the crowd. On the drive back to my apartment, Craig said he was proud of how I'd handled everything with Nina. He said most people would have confronted her immediately or caused a huge scene, but I'd been strategic and protected myself without losing my integrity. He told me I'd turned a terrible situation into genuine growth, and that took real strength. I thanked him and said I couldn't have done it without his support and the support of friends like Kellen. Craig said that's what family and real friends were for, and he was glad I had good people around me. We spent the rest of the weekend watching movies and hanging out, and it felt normal and comfortable in a way that reminded me life didn't have to be complicated or dramatic. My next therapy session on Wednesday focused on forgiveness. My therapist started by saying she wanted to talk about letting go of anger, and I immediately tensed up thinking she was going to tell me I needed to forgive Nina. But she surprised me by saying that wasn't the kind of forgiveness she meant. She said the forgiveness I needed to work on was forgiving myself for missing the red flags and staying too long in a toxic relationship. She pointed out that I kept beating myself up for not seeing through Nina's lies sooner, for being too understanding and supportive when I should have been more skeptical. My therapist said self-compassion was harder than forgiving others because we hold ourselves to impossible standards. She asked me what I would tell a friend who was in the same situation, and I admitted I'd tell them they did nothing wrong and couldn't have known someone would lie about something so serious. She asked why I couldn't extend that same kindness to myself. I didn't have a good answer. She gave me an assignment to write down all the things I was angry at myself for and then respond to each one as if I was talking to a friend. She said I needed to stop punishing myself for being a caring person who got exploited by someone manipulative. The session left me feeling raw, but also lighter somehow, like she'd given me permission to stop carrying guilt that wasn't mine to carry. Everly and I went on our coffee date that Saturday and ended up talking for 3 hours. The chemistry was definitely there this time. We laughed easily and found we had similar senses of humor. She told me about her family and her job and her hobbies. I told her about my work and my brother and my recent disaster of a relationship without going into too much detail. The conversation felt balanced and equal, nothing like the one-sided emotional labor I'd done with Nina. When we left the coffee shop, she suggested we do this again soon, and I agreed immediately. We went to dinner the following week, and then to a museum the week after that. By the 4th date, we'd fallen into an easy rhythm of texting throughout the day and making plans to see each other. After about a month of dating, she invited me to meet some of her friends at a casual group dinner at a restaurant downtown. I was nervous, but agreed because meeting her friends felt like a natural next step. The dinner was on a Friday night, and her friend group was welcoming and normal. Nobody had memorial tattoos for fake dead exes. Nobody monopolized the conversation or made everything about their trauma. People asked me questions about my job and interests and actually listened to the answers. I caught myself relaxing and having genuine fun, laughing at jokes and contributing to conversations without worrying about saying the wrong thing. Everly squeezed my hand under the table at one point and smiled at me, and I realized this was what healthy social dynamics felt like. This was what normal people did when they got together. No drama, no manipulation, just friends enjoying each other's company. At work, my team project wrapped up successfully and got presented to upper management during a quarterly review meeting. My boss praised the work in front of everyone and specifically called out my leadership and strategic thinking. The following week, Danielle from HR called me into her office. I tensed up for a second thinking something was wrong, but she was smiling when I walked in. She told me the executive team had been impressed with my recent performance and I was considered for a promotion to senior team lead. She said the formal decision would take a few more weeks, but wanted to give me advance notice. She also handed me an envelope containing a bonus and a formal commendation letter. I thanked her and left her office feeling stunned. I sat at my desk staring at the commendation letter and realized something important. Investing energy in myself instead of Nina's endless drama had paid off professionally in ways I never expected. Without her constant demands and emotional crises, I'd been able to focus on my actual job. I'd been more creative, more productive, more present in meetings and projects. Getting rid of Nina hadn't just improved my personal life, it had made me better at everything. Everly and I had been dating for about a month when she brought up the exclusivity conversation. We were at her apartment watching a movie on a Sunday night when she paused it and turned to me. She said she really liked me and wanted to know if we were on the same page about seeing other people. I told her I wasn't seeing anyone else and didn't want to. She smiled and said she felt the same way. Then she said something that made me respect her even more. She told me she appreciated that I'd been honest about still processing my last relationship, and she wasn't in a rush to push me into anything before I was ready. The contrast to Nina's love bombing and immediate intensity couldn't have been more obvious. Nina had moved into my apartment within weeks and made herself the center of my entire life. Everly was giving me space to heal while still moving forward together. I told her I was grateful for the healthy pacing and that being with her felt different in the best possible way. She kissed me and unpaused the movie, and we spent the rest of the evening curled up on her couch like a completely normal couple, doing completely normal things. I ran into the mutual friend who hosted the housewarming party, where I met Nina while I was getting coffee near my office one afternoon. She recognized me immediately and came over looking apologetic. She said she'd heard about what happened with Nina and wanted to apologize for introducing us. I told her she couldn't have known, and I didn't blame her for Nina's choices. She looked relieved, and then lowered her voice like she was sharing a secret. She told me Nina had tried to come to a recent birthday party with Elliot, acting like everything was normal. My friend said she uninvited them both because she didn't support that kind of behavior and didn't want them around her other friends. She said several people in their social circle had cut Nina off after learning the truth about the fake death story. I thanked her for having my back, even though we barely knew each other. She said anyone who would lie about something that serious deserved to lose friends over it. We chatted for a few more minutes about work and life, and then went our separate ways. I walked back to my office thinking about how Nina's web of lies had finally caught up with her. She'd lost friends, lost me, and apparently kept losing Elliot over and over because neither of them could stop lying and cheating. Meanwhile, I was building an actual life with honest people who treated me with basic respect. The difference felt massive. My therapist's office felt different this time. I sat in the same chair I'd been sitting in for months, but the weight I used to carry into each session wasn't there anymore. She noticed immediately and smiled before I even started talking. I told her about my life now, the new apartment that actually felt like mine, the weekends spent doing things I wanted to do, the friends who showed up when I needed them. I talked about Everly and how easy everything felt with her, how different it was to be with someone who didn't treat me like a bank account with feelings. My therapist asked how I felt about Nina now, and I realized the anger had faded into something closer to pity. Nina was still out there somewhere, probably running the same scam on some other guy who thought he was being supportive. I felt bad for whoever that was, but I didn't feel bad for myself anymore. My therapist leaned forward and asked if I thought I was ready to graduate from regular sessions to just checking in when I needed to. The question caught me off guard because I hadn't considered that possibility, but as soon as she said it, I knew the answer was yes. I'd processed the major stuff, the betrayal, the manipulation, the way Nina had used my kindness against me. I'd learned to set boundaries and trust my instincts again. I didn't need weekly sessions to keep me on track anymore. We scheduled one final appointment for the following month to wrap everything up properly, and I left her office feeling lighter than I had in years. Kellen texted me Tuesday afternoon, asking if I was free for drinks after work. I said yes, without even checking my calendar because I knew what this was about. My promotion had become official that morning, and Kellen never missed an opportunity to celebrate good news. We met at the bar near our office building, the same place we'd gone after the parking lot incident with Nina months ago. The contrast between then and now felt huge. Back then, I'd been processing the shock of Nina's deception and trying to figure out my next steps. Now I was sitting across from my friend with a beer in my hand and actual things to celebrate. Kellen raised his glass and made a toast about me finally getting what I deserved, both the career recognition and the healthy relationship with Everly. I thanked him for being such a solid friend through everything, for standing next to me when Nina showed up screaming in the lobby, for buying me lunch when I needed to talk, for just being there without making it weird. Kellen laughed and said the entertainment value of my Nina stories was payment enough. He told me he'd been telling people at parties about the fake dead boyfriend saga, and it always got the best reactions. I didn't mind, because the whole thing felt distant enough now that I could laugh about it too. We spent the next hour talking about work and life and normal things that had nothing to do with my ex-girlfriend's elaborate lies. Craig called me 2 weeks before Thanksgiving to confirm he was still coming to visit. I told him yes, and mentioned that Everly would probably be around too since she didn't have family nearby. Craig said he was looking forward to meeting her, and I could hear in his voice that he meant it. He'd been checking in regularly since everything went down with Nina, always making sure I was actually okay and not just saying I was. When Thanksgiving Day arrived, I cooked more food than 3 people could possibly eat because I wanted everything to be perfect. Everly showed up early to help, and we worked together in the kitchen like we'd been doing it for years. Craig arrived right on time with a bottle of wine and a pie from the bakery near his apartment. I introduced him to Everly, and they hit it off right away. They talked about their jobs and found out they both loved the same obscure podcast. They debated about movies and discovered they had opposite opinions on almost everything, but in a way that made them both laugh. I watched them interact and felt this quiet relief that the two most important people in my life actually liked each other. After dinner, Craig pulled me aside while Everly was in the bathroom and gave his approval. He said she seemed genuine and kind, two things Nina had never been. I told him I was taking things slow and learning to trust my instincts again. Craig nodded and said that was exactly the right approach, and he was proud of how far I'd come. My final therapy session happened on a cold Monday morning in early December. I'd been thinking about what I wanted to say for days, trying to figure out how to summarize months of growth into one conversation. My therapist started by asking me to reflect on where I'd been when we first started working together versus where I was now. I told her about the person I used to be, the guy who thought being understanding meant accepting anything, who confused patience with doormat behavior, who let someone exploit his empathy because he was afraid of seeming insensitive. That version of me felt like a stranger now. I'd learned that boundaries weren't cruel, they were necessary. I'd learned that walking away from someone who hurt me wasn't abandonment, it was self-preservation. I told my therapist I wanted to maintain everything I'd learned and never again sacrifice my own well-being just to avoid conflict. She said I'd done remarkable work and should be proud of how I'd transformed betrayal into self-improvement. She reminded me that setbacks might happen, that old patterns sometimes resurface under stress, but I had the tools now to recognize and address them. We talked about what to watch for, signs that I was slipping back into people-pleasing or ignoring red flags because I wanted to believe the best in someone. When our hour was up, she walked me to the door and shook my hand. She told me I was one of her success stories, and I should remember that growth isn't linear, but I'd proven I could handle whatever came next. 4 months had passed since Nina showed up at my office demanding answers. 4 months since I'd blocked her and walked away from the biggest lie anyone had ever told me. I woke up one Saturday morning in my apartment and realized I was genuinely happy in a way I never was with Nina. Everly was still asleep next to me, her hair spread across the pillow, and I felt this overwhelming sense of peace. We were planning a weekend trip to the mountains for the following month. My career was better than it had ever been. Craig and I talked on the phone at least once a week. Kellen and I grabbed lunch regularly and never ran out of things to talk about. My life had become full in all the ways that mattered, full of people who cared about me, full of work that challenged me, full of moments that felt real and honest. I thought about Nina sometimes, but only in the abstract way you think about a bad experience that taught you something valuable. She'd done me a massive favor by being so obviously terrible that I had to leave. If she'd been subtler about her manipulation, I might have stayed longer, wasted more time, lost more of myself trying to be enough for someone who saw me as useful instead of valued. I got out of bed carefully so I wouldn't wake Everly and made coffee in my kitchen. The apartment was quiet, and mine, decorated the way I wanted it, filled with things I'd chosen. Everything felt solid and real in a way my life with Nina never had. I was scrolling through LinkedIn during my lunch break when the notification popped up. Message from Nina Rodriguez. My stomach didn't drop this time. I just felt annoyed that she'd found another platform to bother me on. I opened the message and read her attempt to reconnect professionally. She'd written 3 paragraphs about networking and career opportunities and how we should put the past behind us for the sake of professional growth. The audacity was almost impressive. I blocked her on LinkedIn without responding and went back to eating my sandwich. That evening, I told Everly about it while we were making dinner together. She stopped chopping vegetables and stared at me with this look of complete disbelief. We both started laughing at the same time because what else could you do when faced with that level of inappropriate boundary crossing? Everly said she was glad I had firm boundaries now, and I agreed that old me would have felt guilty for blocking her. Old me would have worried about being rude or wondered if I was overreacting. New me knew that some people don't deserve access to any part of your life, professional or otherwise. Everly kissed my cheek and went back to cooking, and we spent the rest of the evening talking about normal couple things like what movie to watch and whether we needed to buy more groceries. Craig's call came on a Tuesday night while I was reading on my couch. He sounded excited before he even told me his news. He was getting engaged to Sarah, his girlfriend of 3 years, and he wanted me to be his best man. I felt this rush of happiness for him because Craig deserved someone amazing, and Sarah was exactly that. I told him I was honored and would absolutely be his best man. Craig laughed and made a joke about at least one of us finding a partner who doesn't fake anyone's death. We both cracked up because enough time had passed that the Nina situation had become this absurd story instead of a fresh wound. I realized while we were laughing that I could joke about it now without feeling angry or hurt. The betrayal had lost its power over me. It was just something that happened, a chapter that closed, a lesson that stuck. Craig and I talked for another hour about wedding plans and life updates. He asked about Everly, and I told him things were really good, that we were taking our time but moving in the right direction. He said he could hear the difference in my voice when I talked about her versus how I used to sound when I talked about Nina. I asked what he meant, and he said I sounded lighter now, like I wasn't constantly bracing for the next crisis. He was right about that. The announcement came during our Monday morning team meeting. My boss stood at the front of the conference room and talked about leadership and growth and company values before finally getting to the point. I was promoted to team lead, effective next month. My colleagues started clapping and a few people came over to shake my hand after the meeting ended. Kellen caught my eye from across the room and gave me this huge grin because he'd known it was coming and had been terrible at keeping the secret. By lunchtime, he'd organized a happy hour celebration for that evening. The whole team showed up at the bar, even people who usually went straight home after work. They bought me drinks and told embarrassing stories about projects we'd worked on together. I looked around at these people who'd supported me through the worst period of my life. Kellen, who stood beside me in the parking lot, Danielle, who handled the Nina incident with such professionalism, my boss, who gave me challenging work when I needed distraction, colleagues who never made me feel weird about my personal drama bleeding into the office. I felt incredibly grateful for genuine friendships and professional relationships built on mutual respect instead of manipulation. The evening stretched late, and I got home happy and a little drunk, and Everly was waiting up to congratulate me properly. The cabin was 2 hours outside the city, tucked into the mountains with views that made you forget the rest of the world existed. Everly and I loaded up my car early Saturday morning and drove through winding roads that got quieter the further we went. We'd been planning this trip for weeks, and I'd been looking forward to it more than I wanted to admit. The cabin had everything we needed: a fireplace, a full kitchen, hiking trails right outside the door. We spent the first day exploring the area, hiking up to a viewpoint that overlooked the valley below. The air was cold and clean, and Everly's cheeks turned pink from the wind. We took pictures and talked about nothing important, and I felt this peace that came from being with someone who didn't create chaos. That night we cooked dinner together, something simple that we ate in front of the fireplace. The simplicity of being with someone honest and stable felt like a revelation. There was no drama, no hidden agendas, no wondering if she was lying to me about where she'd been or who she was texting. Sunday, we hiked a different trail and found a frozen waterfall that looked like something from a postcard. Everly took my hand and told me she was falling for me. The words hung in the cold air between us, and I realized I felt the same way. I'd been feeling it for weeks, but hadn't said anything because I wanted to be sure, wanted to trust my instincts after Nina had broken them so thoroughly. The last night of our trip, we stayed up late talking in front of the dying fire. Everly was curled up against me on the couch, and I could feel her breathing slow and steady. I'd been thinking about saying it all day, turning the words over in my mind, making sure they were real and not just the result of a romantic weekend. But sitting there with her in the quiet cabin with snow starting to fall outside, I knew it was real. I told her I loved her. She lifted her head and looked at me and said it back without any hesitation. The relationship felt solid and real in a way my time with Nina never did. With Nina, everything had been intense and fast and overwhelming, but it was built on lies, so it never had any foundation. With Everly, things moved slower, but every step felt sure. I was grateful I didn't let Nina's betrayal make me cynical about love, just more careful about who I trusted with my heart. We stayed up talking until the fire went out completely, and the cabin got too cold to sit in the living room anymore. We went to bed, and I fell asleep feeling more certain about my future than I'd been in years. I walked back into the city 3 weeks after the cabin trip and stopped at my usual coffee shop on the way to work. The line moved slowly, and I scrolled through my phone while waiting to order. Someone tapped my shoulder, and I turned to find Michaela standing behind me with a surprised smile on her face. She asked how I'd been, and I told her things were good, really good, actually. We grabbed our coffees and sat at a corner table for a few minutes. She mentioned she'd heard I was dating someone new and seemed happy. I confirmed that both things were true. Michaela hesitated before telling me that Nina had moved to another state with a new boyfriend about a month ago. I waited for some kind of emotional reaction to hit me, but nothing came. No anger, no satisfaction, no curiosity about who the new guy was, or if she was running the same scam on him. I just felt completely neutral about the information. Michaela watched my face and said I seemed really different from the last time we talked, in a good way. I told her I was genuinely happy now and meant it. She said she was glad I'd found someone who treated me right, and we finished our coffees talking about her new job. When we said goodbye outside the shop, I realized I'd gone several minutes without thinking about Nina at all. My mom invited Everly and me to a family barbecue the following Saturday. I'd been nervous about the whole extended family meeting her at once, but Everly seemed excited rather than stressed. We showed up with a fruit salad I'd helped her make that morning. My aunts and uncles welcomed her warmly, and my cousins pulled her into their conversation about some reality show I'd never watched. I stood by the grill with my dad and watched her laugh at something my younger cousin said. My mom appeared beside me holding a plate of burger buns and nodded toward Everly. She pulled me aside near the back door and told me she could see how much healthier this relationship was compared to the brief period she'd met Nina. I asked what she meant, and she explained that with Nina, I'd seemed tense and tired all the time, like I was trying to manage something difficult. With Everly, I looked relaxed and genuinely happy. I told her I'd learned what green flags looked like, not just red ones. She squeezed my arm and said she was proud of me for recognizing the difference. The rest of the afternoon went smoothly, and Everly fit in with my family like she'd known them for years. On the drive home, she told me my family was great and asked when we could do it again. The new team lead position came with a major project that I'd been assigned to oversee. It was the biggest responsibility I'd had at work and involved coordinating between 3 different departments. I spent weeks planning the timeline and delegating tasks to team members. The project had tight deadlines and high visibility with upper management. Every morning I came in early to check progress reports, and every evening I stayed late to solve problems that came up during the day. Kellen asked if I was sleeping enough, and I told him I was running on coffee and determination. The final presentation happened on a Thursday morning in the main conference room. I walked the leadership team through our results and answered their questions with confidence I didn't know I had 6 months ago. My boss stopped me in the hallway afterward and told me the project exceeded all expectations. She commended my leadership skills and strategic thinking. I thanked her and walked back to my desk, feeling proud of what I'd accomplished. Later that afternoon, I sat at my computer updating project files and realized something. The confidence I'd gained from setting boundaries in my personal life had somehow translated into professional assertiveness. I was better at my job because I'd learned to value myself outside of work. Everly and I hit the 6-month mark on a Tuesday. She suggested we celebrate with dinner at the Italian place we'd gone to on our 3rd date. I made a reservation for Friday night, and we both left work early to get ready. The restaurant had the same cozy atmosphere I remembered, and we got a table near the window. Over pasta and wine, I found myself thinking about how different this relationship was from my time with Nina. There was no drama, no manipulation, no financial exploitation. Just 2 people who genuinely cared about each other and communicated honestly. Everly reached across the table and took my hand. She said she knew we were probably boring compared to couples who fought and made up dramatically. I laughed and told her boring was exactly what I wanted. She joked that we were boring in the best possible way. We spent the rest of dinner talking about a vacation we wanted to take in the fall and whether we should get a cat. The conversation was easy and comfortable. When we got back to my apartment, we stayed up late watching a movie neither of us paid much attention to. Craig called me the next week to talk about wedding plans. He'd set a date for next spring and asked if I was still good to be his best man. I told him absolutely, and asked what he needed from me. He started listing tasks like organizing the bachelor party and giving a speech at the reception. I grabbed a notebook and wrote everything down. Over the next few months, I helped him pick out suits and coordinate with the venue. He thanked me one afternoon for being so present and helpful. I told him I was happy to support his happiness. The contrast to how Nina made everything about her grief and needs wasn't lost on me. With Craig's wedding, I got to be part of something joyful instead of constantly managing someone else's manufactured crisis. We met for lunch every couple of weeks to go over details, and he showed me pictures of centerpieces his fiancée was considering. I gave my honest opinion on flowers and color schemes. Craig said he appreciated having a brother who actually showed up for important things. My phone buzzed with a message from Bryson while I was grocery shopping. He said he was checking in and wanted to know how I was doing. I pushed my cart to the side of the aisle and typed back that I'd landed on my feet. He responded that he was glad to hear it and mentioned he'd started going to therapy to work through family issues and his own relationship patterns. I told him I was proud of him for doing that work. We texted back and forth for a few minutes about how therapy was harder than either of us expected, but worth it. He said he'd been thinking about our coffee conversation months ago and realized he had his own patterns to break. I suggested we grab coffee again sometime as actual friends rather than people connected by Nina's chaos. He agreed, and we made plans for the following week. When we met up, the conversation was easier than before. We talked about our jobs and his new apartment and my relationship with Everly. Bryson seemed lighter somehow, like he'd put down weight he didn't need to carry. I understood the feeling completely. Everly came over to my apartment on a Wednesday night looking happier than I'd seen her in weeks. She'd been interviewing for positions in different cities because her current job had limited growth potential. I'd been quietly worried about what would happen if she had to move away for her career. She sat down on my couch and told me she got a job offer in the same city. I asked her to repeat that because I wasn't sure I'd heard correctly. She laughed and said the offer came through that afternoon, and she'd already accepted it. The position was perfect for her and meant she wasn't moving away like we'd worried about. I pulled her into a hug and felt relief wash over me. We celebrated with takeout and spent the evening talking seriously about moving in together eventually. The conversation was mature and practical, focused on logistics and timelines rather than emotional manipulation or rushing. Everly said she wanted to be in her new job for at least 3 months before making any big changes. I agreed that made sense, and we should wait until we'd been together for a year. We discussed budgets and neighborhoods and whether we wanted a 1-bedroom or 2. Everything felt balanced and equal. Craig's wedding arrived on a perfect spring day. I stood at the front of the church in my suit watching guests fill the pews. Craig paced nervously beside me, and I told him to breathe. The ceremony went smoothly, and his fiancée looked beautiful walking down the aisle. At the reception, I gave my speech about love and trust and finding someone who brings out your best self. I talked about watching my brother find his person and how that gave me hope for my own future. Several people came up to me afterward and said the speech was moving and authentic. Craig hugged me during the dancing portion and said he was grateful I'd found my way to healthy love too. I looked across the room and saw Everly talking to some of Craig's college friends. She caught my eye and smiled. The whole day felt like a celebration of good things happening to good people. Everly and I decided to move in together after we'd been dating for a full year. We spent weekends looking at apartments in neighborhoods we both liked. The process was collaborative and exciting in a way I'd never experienced before. We made lists of must-haves and nice-to-haves. We picked out furniture together at stores and online. We merged our lives in a way that felt equal and balanced. I thought about how different this was from Nina essentially moving into my place and taking over without contributing. With Everly, we split costs down the middle and made decisions together. She asked my opinion on curtains, and I asked hers about kitchen appliances. We found a 2-bedroom place with good light and signed the lease together. The move-in date was set for the first weekend of the month. Moving day arrived, and Kellen showed up early with his truck to help us carry boxes. He joked about how this was a much better relationship milestone than the last time he witnessed my relationship drama. I agreed wholeheartedly and thanked him again for being there during the worst of it. He said that's what real friends do. We spent the morning hauling furniture up 3 flights of stairs. Everly organized the kitchen while Kellen and I assembled a bookshelf in the living room. By afternoon, the apartment was starting to look like a home. We ordered pizza for everyone who'd helped and sat on the floor eating because we hadn't set up the dining table yet. Kellen raised his beer and toasted to new beginnings that were actually healthy this time. I planned the dinner party for 3 weeks, sending invites to Kellen, Craig and his fiancée, and a few other friends from work. Everly made a playlist, and we picked out wine together at the store near our apartment. The night arrived and people started showing up around 7. Kellen brought flowers and joked about how domestic we'd become. Craig's fiancée complimented our furniture choices and asked where we got the coffee table. The apartment filled with voices and laughter as everyone settled in around our living room. Everly brought out appetizers she'd made, and I poured drinks for everyone. The conversation flowed easily between work stories and weekend plans and upcoming weddings. I stood in the kitchen for a moment refilling the cheese board and looked out at the scene. Real friends who cared about me sat in my home with a partner I trusted completely. My career was stable and growing. Nobody was lying to me or using me or pretending someone was dead. The gratitude hit me hard enough that I had to pause and breathe. Everly caught my eye from across the room and smiled, and I smiled back, knowing she understood exactly what I was feeling. My boss called me into her office on a Tuesday morning, and I assumed it was about the quarterly reports. She closed the door and told me to sit down, which made my stomach drop for a second. Then she smiled and said the company was creating a senior team lead position, and they wanted to offer it to me. The raise was significant, more than I'd expected, and the responsibilities matched what I'd already been doing informally. I accepted immediately without needing to think about it. She shook my hand and said I'd shown exceptional growth and leadership over the past year. The meeting lasted maybe 10 minutes, but I walked out feeling like I was floating. I texted Everly right away, and she sent back a string of celebration emojis. Kellen heard the news by lunch and insisted on buying me a congratulatory coffee. That night, Everly and I went out for dinner to celebrate, and she raised her glass to toast my success. I realized something sitting across from her in that restaurant. Removing Nina from my life hadn't just made me happier, it made me better at everything. My focus improved, my confidence grew, my work quality increased because I wasn't constantly drained by someone else's manufactured drama. The promotion was proof that investing in myself, instead of a toxic relationship, had paid off in ways I never anticipated. We booked the vacation 2 months in advance, picking a city neither of us had visited before. The trip celebrated both my promotion and our 1-year anniversary of living together. We flew out on a Friday morning and spent the week exploring neighborhoods and trying restaurants we found by wandering around. No itinerary, no schedule, just enjoying each other's company without any pressure or chaos. We walked through museums and parks and sat in coffee shops reading books. One night we found a small jazz club and stayed until midnight listening to live music. Another day, we took a cooking class and laughed our way through making pasta from scratch. Everything felt easy and natural, in a way I'd never experienced with Nina. On our last night, we sat on the balcony of our hotel room watching the city lights. Everly turned to me and said she wanted to build a whole life with me. Not just live together or date long-term, but actually build something real and lasting. I told her I wanted that too, and I meant it completely. The conversation wasn't scary or overwhelming. It felt like the most natural thing in the world. A year and a half after I found those messages on Nina's phone, I stood in my apartment getting ready for work and took stock of where I'd landed. Senior team lead with a team I respected and a boss who valued my contributions. Living with someone I loved and trusted, who showed me every day what a healthy relationship looked like. Surrounded by genuine friends and family who supported me without drama or manipulation. I'd learned that my empathy and kindness weren't weaknesses for people to exploit. They were strengths to share with people who deserved them. Nina's deception taught me what I wouldn't tolerate anymore. Everly showed me what I actually deserved. The contrast was so stark, it almost seemed funny now. I used to think being understanding meant accepting whatever someone threw at me. Now I knew the difference between supporting someone through hard times and being used as a resource. My boundaries were clear. My standards were higher. I was never settling for less again.